Welcome to Café with Cavagna. Today we have with us Gary Melling and Tracy Fiber. Gary is the CEO and Tracy is the CSO at Acquiring Insights Incorporation. They are in Canada and we are in Brazil. Welcome, Gary. Welcome, Tracy. Good morning for me. Good morning for you.
For me,
Hello.
Good morning as well. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you very much for coming. Please, could you please explain to us the new technology that we have today, very famous ones, artificial intelligence, machine learning. What are the main ones you have and applicable for value chains, specifically for oil and gas, if you have some examples?
Wonderful. Tracy, should I run with that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Armando, as we think of the emerging technologies that have become more available over the last recent number of years, we're seeing the opportunity to use machine learning, artificial intelligence, in ways that we've never seen before. This becomes particularly relevant in oil and gas, especially when topics such as predictive or preventative maintenance come up, health and safety, being able to look at marine or well logging seismic reports and take a look at mining that data further to be able to identify new and potential fields for tapping into. It can also be used for taking a look at how plots of land are allocated based on drilling rates and so on. So there's historical data that can be now leveraged much faster, much more effectively than we were able to do in the past. However, it extends right through the full life cycle of operations, not only from the legislation and legal implications of permits and so on for fields, but as well as the production, the distribution, the supply chain management. We also have the industrial Internet of Things that allows us to tie into little devices that sit on generators and pumps and trucks and so on. So machine learning and acquired insights has become really the new vanguard of where the industry is going. And it's not only powerful in existing operations and greenfield operations, it's particularly useful and essential in doing a lot of cost savings, especially when it comes to remote sites. Because now you can have a technician fly to a particular site, and instead of being back there once a month, once every 2 months to monitor the efficacy of the equipment and so on, now with these remote sensors, artificial intelligence and machine learning, they can be pinged and all kinds of data with respect to maintenance, serviceability, the people who provided the equipment, contractual agreements, maintenance, uptime, and so on, can all be merged in the back end to give an organization a much more complete sense of the efficacy of their operations. Are they making money? Are they making as much money as they could be making? Where can we take a look at minimizing risk for humans? So there are many, many considerations, but it's a very, very exciting field.
Excellent. Tracy, you have something to say in this case?
Of course. So I think that there's been a lot of data that's out there and that the oil and gas has accumulated and hasn't necessarily used. And now with the artificial intelligence, machine learning, and even the predictive analytics, we can now take a look at that information, not only the information that the company has, but external information that's out there in GPS, weather patterns, etc. And we can take all of that into consideration to then do some predictive analytics and machine learning. So it's no longer just the company's information that's used. It's now external data as well, and even behavioral, social, all sorts of things, depending on what area that the company is looking at bringing this into.
Canada is more focused on onshore operations, I suppose, because Calgary area is a very onshore.
Calgary is very landlocked, yes. But there's also offshore operations. And Gary, maybe you should talk a little bit about some of your background with the offshore.
Sure, thank you, Tracy. Yes, Armando, I've had the good fortune of working in the North Atlantic, the high Arctic, working in oil operations, exploration, drilling. So I've worked with companies from all around the world, Royal Dutch Shell, a lot of the organizations that do barge work and drilling and so on. So I think it was probably more active in the sort of late 70s, early 80s in Canada. We had the Petroleum Incentive Program, which the government used to offset a lot of the costs for exploration. And so there was a lot of work done to do marine geophysics and seismology to map out what was below the ocean floors. And I think although we've waited a few decades to get to where we are now, clearly the Hibernia fields off the eastern coast, Newfoundland, and so on are also in a lot of production. So we're a very well-rounded oil producer, whether it's using well logging and land-based seismics, or whether it's actually offshore production.
Gary and Tracy, understanding that we have a very long process in oil industry, from the exploration to the commissioning at the end of the life cycle, which one of these processes are more intensive in terms of these new technologies? And other question, which level we have in terms of digital and new technologies applied to oil and gas? 10% or 90% today?
Go ahead, Gary.
With respect to the life cycle, when we think of where the technology can be applied, really, I mean, it's ubiquitous. It can be used anywhere in the life cycle, as we mentioned before, from early exploration, merging company data, seismic data, with weather patterns for taking a look at production platforms, health and safety. But having said that, I think probably where we're seeing major adoption and application of that technology is probably in refining and production. These are existing plants where there are already control rooms. They already have a certain degree of pneumatic hydraulic sensors that are being used. What I think is happening is there's more adoption of electronic sensors, much like you would see in a telematics environment with a moving vehicle. Now there are multiple places where those sensors can be installed and implemented. And then, of course, in the actual distribution, post-refining, making sure that trucks themselves are on the road and delivering inventory to whether it's gas stations or whoever the end customer is. So I wouldn't say that there's any one place. I think it's being raised in all of the various elements, but probably being adopted more in production and distribution.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, Gary, even if you look at the whole industry overall, as you know from innovation, you have the early adopters, et cetera. We're getting in the oil and gas to that, the past the early adopters, but we're now at the stage of really the early innovators and the ones that are making it mainstream. So we're nearing that 50% of companies, getting close to that number, that they've implemented some sort of analytics, and they're now looking to, how do I take my analytics to the next level? So they might have already implemented some basic analytics, some dashboards, et cetera, and now how can I bring more information in and glean better insights and use that artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive analytics?
And Tracy, I think you've touched on a really important point here. Many organizations have voluminous amounts of data. As Tracy said, they've been harvesting data for, in many cases, decades, and they haven't necessarily had an immediate application for that data. And what they're now finding is that the data that they have been storing for all of this time is actually one of their best sources of data, because it can be mined. And machine learning works by, first of all, taking a couple to 3 months to understand what the parameters are of the data and how it can classify information and categorize it and so on. After about 2 or 3 months of working with some fairly sophisticated data sets, artificial intelligence can be used to actually glean those insights. So as we think of large data repositories, and again, I'll emphasize, it's not all just structured data. This is unstructured and semi-structured data. So whether it is an email, whether it's a handwritten note, whether it's a photograph, a video, think of all the different sources of data capture that we have available to us today. And now, instead of just working with data that's siloed and maintained in a relational database or an SAP, an Oracle, or an Excel spreadsheet, we can now introduce all of these other forms of data that are so rich in helping create better decisions, not the least of which is the data that resides between the ears of the employees who are on the ground all day, every day, working at major facilities, working in remote sites, and they have a certain way of doing things that hasn't always been documented. Well, we also have a tool we affectionately call Kazam. It's a mobile app that allows users to be in any particular environment, whether it's white collar, blue collar, whatever it is, and they're able to use this as a portal, a window into inputting data that's unstructured and merge it with that structured data on the back end to give these companies much more valuable insight to their operations. So it really pinpoints where are they making money, what can they do differently to save money, what can they do to make sure employees are not at risk. There are many, many different considerations. Preservation of brand in the event of an accident. How does that affect insurance policies? All kinds of considerations. Well, up until now, we've always been looking at things retroactively. An event has happened, and we've had to look historically after that event happened. What can we learn from it? But now with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and predictive analytics, we can use that essential pool of data to actually anticipate when something's likely to happen and put interventions in place before it happens. So we're much more proactive in mitigating, recognizing, and so on threats to the business continuity.
Gary, it's interesting because capture non-structured data and put together with structured data from a company and personal data sets that people keep in drawers and in pockets. So we bring everything to the same base and make intelligence on this data is very interesting. Another point that you mentioned, Tracy, that I put here to remember, refining and production are very stable, geographically speaking, very stable. So, and they are systematic at the same time. They are very repetitive in terms of process. So this is easier in terms of comparing to exploration, drilling, seismic, logging. It's more complicated, these ones, to make this approach. In the first level, in the second level, you can, of course, you go ahead. Yeah, good. In your website, I saw that you mentioned industry agnostic solutions. What do you mean as agnostic solutions? Because it's very important. So, I mean, it's not Schlumberger, Halliburton, Baker dependent, your solutions?
Yeah, so Gary, I'll just take that quickly. Our solutions are agnostic. We can connect to any other system in the industry. So Halliburton, et cetera, if they've started down the path, a lot of times the larger companies are talking to us when they want to take their technology to another level. We have up to 300 data scientists, mathematicians on the back end. And so that's a lot of experience, over 300 years of experience. And so with that, a lot of times in the company, you only see the things that you see. You may not notice other things. And that's where the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, predictive analytics can come in. And not only can the data scientists see something different because they are trained in the data, but also the system can then look at and glean insights that really you haven't considered before, even from your own data, not bringing in the external data. But many times too, it could be other companies who do have some sort of analytics dashboard that they create and they work with the larger companies. We also are in discussion or talking to or working with some of those. And so it doesn't matter whether it's the actual company that needs the solution or one of their suppliers that needs the solution. And sometimes, the companies are saying, when my supplier gets the solution, that's when I'll implement. Well, we're working with a lot of those companies. So it's just a matter of, are you going to wait for that, or are you going to move forward, to progress your company? So what point are you at? How are you on that innovator scale? And when are you going to implement?
And if I might just add one point here, what we're seeing often...
Gary, on a moment. Only to put more one variable to your comment. Oil companies love to have agnostic providers not dependent providers, because they have problems and conflicts between providers when they have the same service coming from different providers. Sorry, Gary. Go ahead, Gary.
I appreciate the point that you just made, Armando, because it's very true. There tends to be often politics and so on that gets in the way of doing good business. And the fact that we're agnostic means that regardless of what the data form, the data source is, the software used to capture it, whatever it is, we can work with it all. So it's really, that leads really to the point I was going to make, which was when you think of, let's go back, let's say 20 years ago to large-scale ERP implementations that were being done to ready businesses for Y2K. I spent years on Wall Street doing ERP implementations, and I've got a fairly good appreciation for the nuances associated with that work. I can tell you that when you traditionally take a look at an enterprise-wide ERP implementation, and it's getting better, but it's still not good, an organization will typically get involved in a 3, 4, or 5-year project to implement an ERP. The first year is undoubtedly going to be process reengineering, because the client's processes do not match the software. So the software is requiring these companies to modify their work processes to back into the implementation of the software. Year 2 is where they implement the actual vanilla. Years 3 and 4 are customization. So it's very often that an organization is really not in a position to start to measure any ROI until about years 4, 5, 6, sometimes even beyond. Now, the beauty with what we were talking about a moment ago, with solutions being, our software and solutions being agnostic, is because we can work with any provider at all, any source of data at all, we're able to configure our solutions very quickly. So it's not uncommon for us to take a global project and implement a solution, given proof of concept, minimum viable product, and the natural solution evolution, but we could typically have a solution in place in 6 to 9 months. And we do that fast, that quickly, because our back end is all plug and play, drag and drop. So once we understand the client's requirements, what problem are they trying to solve, the actual configuration of the solution is extremely fast relative to these traditional ERP systems.
Yep. Let me ask a question that's very important for us here in Brazil nowadays. Cybersecurity, oil and gas, of course, and operational safety. So these 2 points, how you are facing these 2 challenges in Canada?
So we're bringing on a whole division for cybersecurity, former CSIS level people. And with that, we're making sure, of course, we also have our ethics management office within our own company. And so with the cybersecurity, that it's becoming more and more common. We have to make sure that it doesn't become so commonplace that we become complacent. And so with cybersecurity, we're bringing in that top level people that really a lot of companies wouldn't have access to if it wasn't coming through us. That's why we're bringing these things together. Because if you just bring in cybersecurity people, then they may not have the technology or the other links to the other things that we can do. By bringing it together, we can use our solutions in consultation with cybersecurity professionals and really find out where are the hacks coming from, what's happening, predict it ahead of time so that we can put things in place. Gary?
Agreed. And, when we think of cybersecurity, like everything else, there's actually a range of competency. And in cybersecurity, on the low end, you have professionals who are taking more of an orientation program on a weekend or a 1- and 2-day course where they get a certificate or something and consider themselves to be a cybersecurity consultant. And at the other extreme, you have the kind of talent that Tracy was referring to. And we have that second type of talent that we're talking about. We have people who have been in positions in international government, working on behalf and with other governments in liaison to be able to identify, to do audits, to develop solutions, to implement them, to evaluate them. We even have one part of our team that are what we call ethical hackers, and we use them in the cybersecurity environment throughout the solution development and implementation process to make sure that nothing has changed as far as the security we can offer, that we're constantly working to test the bounds, if you will, of the cybersecurity interventions we apply. So that's a very real concern. It's probably the one thing that keeps most executives awake at night, and not only in oil and gas. And if you take a look at nuclear, if you take a look at coal, if you take a look at retail, really any industry, it has the potential to be hit hard because of cybersecurity problems. So that's one element. The other is the safety. And so looking from a safety perspective, we've designed and built systems in health and safety audit management, cloud-based systems. We can link those together with international standards. We can tie them together with cybersecurity to make sure only the right people are accessing that information, and that the reporting mechanisms are subject to the right scrutiny, the right governance, the right security profiles, and so on. So, you can have a technically sophisticated solution, but if you're not cognizant, if you're not aware of the implications, let's say, to your workforce and health and safety, one accident, despite all the best technology, could be a situation that damages the brand, let alone the lives and families of the individuals involved.
Yeah. But, sorry, Gary and Tracy, do you believe that artificial intelligence and all other technologies that are coming very fast can increase or decrease the safety issues in terms of offshore platform, for instance?
Oh, I believe that the artificial intelligence and machine learning will decrease the opportunities for any kind of incidents to happen, and it can be done in a very preventative way through tools like predictive maintenance and things like that. Because we're also working with unstructured data, it's important to remember that we're also capturing the knowledge between the ears of the people working on those platforms. There may not be a specific written form for them to complete that can capture what they've seen. But if they've seen something, if they've heard something, they can take their mobile device and capture it and dictate a message, and all of these things will contribute to much more safer environments.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too that with the Kazam app, think about people, have that device always with them. And so even with GPS, et cetera, Armando, it can sense where it is that you're walking, and, asking the safety questions to say, do you have your PPE equipment on, right? Your personal protection equipment on. You aren't allowed in this area. You've stepped outside of a yellow line. Because of the location that you are, it can sense that and even push information to you. It's not just capturing all of it and doing something with it on the back end. It's then pushing information and alerting you and sending you the red flags or the flashing message to say, get out of this area, right? Or something's about to happen in the area. So from a safety perspective and operational perspective, I think that's an important thing in the oil and gas industry.
And I think from a company perspective, why this is also very valuable is you may have, let's just say for argument's sake, you may have a platform outside Denver, and the same company may have a similar piece or the same piece of equipment in Dubai. And you have two people in the same company in two remote locations in a responsible position to maintain that equipment. If one person enters information based on their user profile and security and so on, whatever knowledge it is they're inputting to the system, the machine learning and artificial intelligence will work with that information and make sure that the individual in Dubai or Dublin or wherever they may be is also made aware of that situation. So if I find myself walking on the same type of catwalk or working with the same type of equipment, it's going to push information to me actually before I even know that I need it, giving me some advice on what I should do next as a next best action. So I think all of these will contribute to lower incidents in the workplace for accidents and so on.
Great. Let me ask you both. In Brazil, we have very small companies working in northeast part of the country for onshore operations, small fields and reservoirs, trying to recover reservoirs. And what is the roadmap you could advise to them to enter in this new area of digital for oil and gas, what are the steps you see that you can advise for these small companies on onshore operations, shale operations, for instance?
Mm-hmm. So, Gary, are you okay if I take this one?
Yes, actually, Tracy just finished presenting at a conference on exactly this topic. So she's got
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking, Armando. I did a presentation to the Calgary oil field people, about over 100 people there. And so with that, we talked in that presentation about the upstream, the midstream, the downstream. So it all depends on what area that you are in and what the roadmap will be. So it depends. We always have to go in and take a look at what are the technologies that you have. How is it that you're using it? The size of the company, small, medium, large. From our perspective, it's just more data, right? And so we take a look at what is it that you need and how can we customize it for you. So it's not an implementation that's the same for everybody across the board. There's components that might be the same, but how we implement it for you as opposed to someone else is going to be different. And that's why people like what we have, is because it can be applied to a variety of sizes of companies, but it also then goes into the customization within that company depending on what it is that you have. So we do have a basic general overview roadmap, and yet how it's implemented for you is going to be different than the next company.
And you have a presentation, I mean a PowerPoint or something like that that you can, let's see, offer to us?
Yes, absolutely. And so if anybody wants that, they can email info@aiinc.cloud and I will send that to them. Just mention this interview and then I'll know exactly what presentation to send them, and that, they came through you, just so that I know, and I will email that to anyone. Absolutely.
Excellent. We appreciate these conversations, very informative one. And both Tracy and Gary, thank you from Brazil to Canada. I will send you the gift for both.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you very much, Armando.
Very good. Thank you very much for all.
You're
Our
welcome.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.